You are listening to the Bring Joy Forward podcast. Conversations to explore, heal, and grow. You can find us on bringjoyforward.com and join us in our community group on Facebook. We now take you to the episode. Thank you for joining us. Hi, thank you for joining us here on the Bring Joy Forward podcast. I am Shannon Dias with Imaginative Media, and I am joined by Marlisa McLaughlin, Marlisa Energy. And we are going to talk to you today about a subject that you may not think of as grief. We're going to talk about those places, spaces, things in our life that go away unexpectedly. We have to leave them behind. We move. We're forced out of a space, and we don't necessarily think about it as grief, but that's what's happening. We're going to process and work through this loss of something that was in our life that we loved and we don't have anymore. So join us on this little adventure. We'll take you through some of that and give you some tools that you can work with along the way. Marlisa, do you want to start us out?
Sure. Thank you, Shannon. Shannon and I actually came together with the same idea, and we hadn't even been speaking for a while. I think there's so much shifting. It's the beginning of the new year. People are making changes, and some of those changes are not occurring by sheer will. And even the changes that people have been working towards and have made decisions for, you can't know what something's going to feel like until you're in the midst of it, right? And so a lot of that can be so blindsiding when it comes to the grieving part of it, because you don't associate those things with grief. And outwardly in our society, people have a hard enough time discussing loss with loved ones. Yeah. So even just right, Shannon, the consideration that somebody could be like, I wanted to say illustrating, but I embodying it's even hard to say, but the suffering and the challenges that come with accepting letting go. And especially these places that have been the home for the dynamics of how we live, for our habits, our safety places where we're sharing or even isolating. For those of you who live alone, to have that nest that's completely your energy, and then to have it gone, almost like it got vaporized, even if you've been planning and getting ready for the change, you can't know until you know. And then all of a sudden, there you are, grieving. And I was even reminded by my own sister, who knows that I specialize in grief and is going through a loss of a property, of a home she loved, that I had to remember how deep her grief is. Like, her grief is so deep. And I was almost embarrassed for myself, because the depth of it is almost inconceivable if you're not the one going through it. And I think that's a really good point, Shannon, for us to start with. Like, how can you validate your loss over things that are not normally, or not normally, but commonly acknowledged as a reason to grieve? And that's going to trigger off, by the way, for all of us who have lost loved ones, all of that is our foundation of grief underneath the losses of these places and these things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and you said the word foundation, and I think, that's kind of the first step in recognizing, like, it's that, that root chakra, that sense of safety that goes right away. And sometimes you don't know that that's what's happening. You just feel the emotion and you start grasping and holding on very tightly to this thing that is no more, or will be no more. Like, it's coming. Maybe you're having to move, or you're sharing a space that you're no longer going to share a space, whatever those things are. You start to hold on really tightly, and it becomes even more important than it was before, because now it's going away. So you're paying attention to it a little bit more. And so it shakes up that foundation. But I think that's also an opportunity for us to look at it and see what it is about that we really need in our life, and focus on how to bring that in. And to your point of you said your sister had to remind you and not recognizing, and I think that's really such a big part of grief and trauma in any way, is that we judge in general, I think, as a human race, we judge by what we see. And what we see or hear, or experience is often such a small, tiny, tiny part
Mm,
of the reality. And so we get caught up, and then we're also, I think by nature, we're selfish beings. And so we get caught up in how we see it and how we feel about it. And then you add that added layer of um, understanding that somebody else might be going through something that is maybe more extreme. So if we're talking about grief versus a place, grief versus a person, people will say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I know it doesn't compare." And there's an element to that where it's not about comparison. None
mm,
of it's about comparison. It's all about what you feel. Everything is internal, is how you're experiencing it, and then how that energy is working through you and then what you do with it. So if you're at this state of something is changing in your life, because that's what we're talking about, right? Grief is the loss of something you had and no longer have or will have. So it's a change that's happening. So if you're in this state where you're, holding on really tightly, look at that, I think, as an opportunity to appreciate what you had, honor that space that you had, feel all those emotions, and let them out, be sad, be angry,
angry.
loss, you know.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
have to. And
yeah, and just
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
We always inspire one another. I was
Yeah.
just thinking in context for myself while listening to you. There were a couple things that I wanted to invite a change in vocabulary for to see how you can reframe a situation. Because
Mm,
I agree with you. And I find that when I use the term judgment, like when I feel as though I'm judging or being judged, there's a harshness to that that puts me in a non-supportive perspective or state. And so what I've
mhm.
decided, I when I'm conscious of it and I can remember, I ask myself, or I switch the word over to, we're collecting information and we're assessing and basing our perception on the assessment of what we know rather than judging it because it's less heavy for me. And I just invite that in because I spend a lot of time trying not to be self-judgmental, and that takes me down, right? And when I'm
Yes.
feeling down, it's heavy that way. And also, oh gosh, now I'm not remembering the other word that I thought was so important because you were talking about self-judgment
Yeah.
and how we judge, and then there was what was the second part? You were talking about. Oh, I'm so sorry.
About no, that's okay. That's what happens, right? And that's a product of grieving too, is that our
Yeah,
brains don't work the same. So
that's
this happens all the
true.
time,
And
when
I
you go to
actually, to be transparent, I'm also grieving right now, and that might be why, because the home that my
yeah.
sister had, she shared with me. I've spent a lot of time in the home, and with all the furniture out of this 200-year-old federal style home, with only warmth embodied in the home. I
Mm,
couldn't believe because I lived there releasing my album that I'm making for sound meditation,
yeah.
and I did not feel like any furniture was gone. There was so much character in the house and so much
Mhm.
embracement. Like I felt really safe that in the middle of the dark night, I could go down into the guts of the basement where the gristmill workings were, and all the way up into the attic where I was recording and everywhere in between without feeling scared, for lack of a better word, or cautious that what's lurking in the dark in this place I don't know. There
Yeah.
was so much,
Well,
and that's what's in a safe place is that
yeah.
comfort level. So to
And
your
and I think scared is the right word because that's what happens, right? We're if it's a thing that's changing, and we're having to do something different. It's an unknown. So it's that fear of the unknown. And will I feel safe again? But I love this place. I love this area. I love doing this in this location, whatever it
Right.
is. And so it becomes this, am I going to find that again? And
Right.
so you're having to move towards that. And I think too, like the idea, and let me just say too, I love the rephrasing. And I think that we do that a lot in healing, where we
Yeah,
flip things
helps.
over. Yeah, we turn them around, we replace words, and it's difficult because it's difficult to make those changes because they're almost habitual. In some cases, they are
Yeah,
habitual. We're
yeah, yeah.
just using words that, and I do this all the time. And I think it's funny because when I'm in writing mode, it's very different than when I'm speaking mode.
Mm,
And sometimes I'll say things and I'll be like, well, that wasn't quite like, I'm not translating it the way that I intended to translate it, right? And so if we move too fast
mm.
between, this thing we've just discovered is happening to now we have to make a change. If we move too fast between those places, I think we miss the good bits where we have to acknowledge things and sit with how we felt about it, why we felt about it, what was it about it, and even just to honor it, even just to hold space for that energy. And you pretty much just talked about that, like in your space in the home, you were holding that space. I think it's so beautiful that you were in that location and you're recording this beautiful album that is all about interpretation, right? Because you're saying, here's a word. For those of you that don't know, and we'll talk about it in a second, just to give you a little bit more background. But Marlisa's recording using her sound modalities, different types of instruments and crystal bowls and gongs and all of the wonderful tools at her disposal, where she's encouraging the community to describe what they feel or see based on just words. So we're talking about the interpretation. And so every individual is getting a different response that they are relaying back to Marlisa. And then she is just taking all of these and blending this into this beautiful experience of sound that encompasses everything. So you are doing that. It's very Aquarius energy. You're putting something out into the world. You're getting all of these bits and pieces and you're bringing it back in. You're adding some more magic to it and you're putting it back out into the world again. And I think that's kind of what happened in the house. You're in this space where there's no furniture in there, but the feel of it is still there. And so you're kind of honoring that space and being in there with just the experience of the warmth of the location. And I think we kind of need to do that with our things, our feelings that we're going through about whatever it is. Maybe you're switching jobs. It can even be a good thing. You may want to switch a job, right? You may be, looking for something better, or you get a promotion, or, whatever. And it's a good thing that you want, but that doesn't mean you don't feel some loss from the thing that you're leaving. And so I think it's
Yes.
important to pause, right? And that's one of the tools, I think, is to, use meditation, use journaling to sit with what you're feeling and jot it down, let it free flow out. What is it that you're going through? And don't diminish it because it seems like something that you shouldn't have big feelings about, or, it's not as
Perfectly
much
said.
as so and so. Yeah.
Then that's that validation that it's
Yeah.
very important while we're grieving to feel validated because of the assessment, the judgment we have on ourselves of why
Yeah.
why am I feeling this way? Why am I suddenly incapacitated? Or that I can't
Mm.
get words out in a flow, or I'm not productive in the way that I used to, or I'm not feeling joie de vivre where I want to go out and join people. And then some of the things I think that, those are really helpful activities and productivity. But if you're not even there yet and you're in the numb state and you're kind of like aware that you're grieving, but you can't move yet, and I'm sure anybody who suffered loss, we all know you can't get off the couch or wherever it is, you're just kind of stuck. That beginning to acknowledge that, like we said, is the first part. Then validating that it's okay to be there and feeling and taking the pause. And don't expect too much from yourself. Do the small things. Like have an action plan. Like, what if I wake up in the middle of the night, because this has happened to people who have talked to me, and I can't get back to sleep again, and I suddenly find myself spiraling into a panic attack, right? What can I do? So have the things ready. Have whatever works for you, like a glass of warm milk or melatonin or something to ingest that helps you feel comforted, or a favorite program or something on YouTube. Like, and these are things that were just given to me the other day I said, so what are you going to do about that? Like, what's your action plan for a possible case of insomnia? And I was very happy for that person to know that they had a list of things, whereas in my assessment from the outside, all I could see was the immobilized grief and didn't realize that what they were doing was actually more than what anybody else could have suggested they could do, because they knew from you know from the inside out what you're capable of at the time that you're in that state.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And
So,
I love that. It goes back to the same thing, right? That assessment, because you don't know. You like you said, you don't know what's going on inside there. And I think also to that point, being prepared, if you have the knowledge that there's these things that you can go to, that helps when you're in that state, right?
you're not
But
in
you're not.
despair.
Yeah, yeah, and that's great because you're listening to this podcast now, so you can get some ideas, you can do some research, you can Google, you can talk to your healers and your professionals and everything. But before that, in all the times before you knew that you should be prepared, you have to kind of forgive yourself because you've been hard on yourself in those states because you are told, you can't just sit in this chair. And, we go through life thinking I should be doing something else. I can't just be. And you're absolutely right that you can just be. I had a moment the other day that a good 30 minutes went by where I was like, after that 30 minutes, I went, wow, 30 minutes just went by, like in a blink, because I lost that time because I was internally processing. And it was a stop, like you mentioned. I just need a minute. And I sat down and I was almost, just in a meditative state unknowingly, um, just finding the pause. And then and it wasn't me actively doing anything. It was me actively doing nothing, right? And I think that when that happens to us, we feel bad about it. We feel like there's something wrong in that state. But it's not wrong. It'd be wrong if you were doing this 100% of the time and it was affecting your everyday life in all cases, right? Then you seek help for that. But these are important parts, I think, that we don't acknowledge, because if something is that heavy for us, regardless of whether our brain thinks it should be, if it's heavy on our heart and on our energy, then we need that time for it to just ooze, just settle in to all of the places and let us feel it, let us, do whatever we need to it and honor that space, because it makes it a little bit easier to look at it later and to do the things and the journaling and, what have you. I
When you
wanted to
get
mention tapping too, just real quick, as a tool. So EFT tapping is a beautiful tool for immediate, very quick, uses the acupuncture pressure points in your body. We do have some tools, on our page about that too, but just do some Google on that. And again, you can ask, your professional as well, but that's a very good tool that utilizes your mind, but also your physical, so that you can, find that pause in that moment when you are starting to spiral and go down that road. sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. You were
No,
going
no,
to add
no.
something to that.
I'm going to add that EFT is emotional freedom technique.
Yes. Yes.
That's good to know that. So if you forget those words, you can say, oh, there was something about emotions and freedom, and that will get you to the Google link if you can't remember.
Yes.
And your
Thank you.
breath, the most important aspect of all is just the deep breath, but it has to be intentional so that it can go in and work in your system. And again, free you up when you're feeling claustrophobic inside your own self. Like you just don't want to be in there. It's too crammed up with nothing. So,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
man, it's really heavy and it's real. It's so real and it's hard to be there. I was just
Yeah.
thinking also that if for those of you who might find it challenging to imagine how grief could be so hard when you've lost a space, it's the energy, the memories, like walking into the empty living room, and or even when you're sitting there and you're not away, like you haven't moved yet, but you're appreciating the space you have. And on all the other months when it's not Christmas, how often have we looked over and knew, oh, that's where our Christmas tree always is? You know, like there's a tradition and a gathering and a build and a momentum and a seasonal shift and an identification of how we as a human being join in together as a human family and share ritual. And that's what's in all of these things. Momentums that we've been given from people, tokens of love, things that mean something. They're not decorative, superficial items. They carry with them sometimes generations of
Yeah.
love. And so we're letting go of a lot more than we realize on the surface. And I wanted to just make that point before we end, to really just be aware that even, hey, how about even the ideas? I'll never forget the loss of the belief in Santa Claus. It came after the loss of my mom. I think I talked about this once in one of our podcasts, but I can read that in the textbook. Oh yeah, the loss of beliefs and systems, and the list of things that cause grief. But when I stopped to realize that, and I resourced my own experience, I will just I can still just about feel it, that sadness of the belief that Santa Claus was real and he really isn't. There was a completely, like, the whole floor just dropped out and down I went into Alice's rabbit hole, like
Yeah.
that unknown of, okay, if that belief system really doesn't work for me anymore, then what? There's a loss
Yeah.
there. Again, what's it all about? Safety and comfort. So when we get out of those places, that's the grieving aspect that I think is most challenging.
Yeah. Well, you question in that one, especially you question reality, right? So I think your analogy of falling down the rabbit hole with Alice, where you're just all out of control and spinning, is so perfect, because that's what happens inside. Is this everything becomes questioned. What am I going to do about this? If it's something that that's changing in your life, if it's a belief system, it's what was even real and what isn't, and how can I trust and who can I trust, and
Hmm.
I can remember that same situation, and mine was so much so that I got two more Christmases out of it, because I just refused to accept the reality of it. I lived in the fantasy. I knew it wasn't real, and I walked with the knowledge that it wasn't real, but I was like, oh hell no, I'm holding on to this for as long as I can. And what's so great about my parents is, even though we knew about it after the fact, they kept that magic alive, and just kept it going. And I think that's so valid, that it's challenging. um it's challenging everything inside you, and so it's throwing all of that balance off, and acknowledging that, even whatever it is that's doing that, acknowledging that this is happening, is, the start. Like, it's okay, this is happening. Validate that this is good, and the way I feel, not this is good, but this is okay, and this the way I feel is the way I feel, and just validate what you're going through. Allow yourself to handle whatever it is that you're in, right? Allow yourself to just be in it. Handle is not the right word, but just to be in it.
In whatever way
And
that you can show up,
right,
authentically show up. And if that means,
authentically show up. Yep.
yeah,
Yeah. And like you said, if that means you're just sitting there doing absolutely nothing and you're just, that's it, that's all you've got, that's okay. That's where you're at, right? And just validating that how you feel is okay and what you can give is okay. And then knowing that you've got some tools at your disposal to kind of work through that. And tools vary. For me, imagination, even way back when I refused to believe that Santa wasn't real, imagination is a tool. I use gaming as a tool, and for processing and for my brain just lost the word, but for pretending. I can't think of the word. My brain just went somewhere else. But yeah, so just utilizing what you've got. It doesn't have to be a clinical thing that you're doing. It's whatever helps you process and whatever helps you be in that space. But you're not alone. We just wanted to kind of make that point on this particular episode where it's can be anything. Grief can come across in any way. Grief of loss, grief or loss can come across in any way for anything. So be gentle with yourself. It's not a competition, and you're doing awesome. Yeah. Do you have anything else that you want to add?
No, I was just thinking about how nicely you just wrapped all of that up, that what we really wanted to help you with today in this episode was exactly that. And to just change your vocabulary, reframe the way that you're thinking about something if it doesn't support you. Like if I can end with anything, is just ask yourself at any given point when you're in any kind of state, is what I'm thinking, feeling, or doing, is it supportive or is it non-supportive to me right now in this moment? And then just take a breath and move on to the next one. And it might be the same question for 10 hours, but walk that line, because that's what you want to do, is just make sure that whatever it is you're doing, which even if it's nothing, is supporting the state that you're in your state of grief.
Beautiful. Absolutely. Well, you have been watching or listening to the Bring Joy Forward podcast. We appreciate you joining us and supporting us along our journey as we support you. You can find us on Facebook, both on a Facebook page and in a Facebook group. And you can find us at bringjoyforward.com. And if you want to go straight to our community page where we have events and things like that for you, you can go to community.bringjoyforward.com. We appreciate you having a wonderful day with us. Thank you so much.
Thanks. See you next time.
You have been listening to the Bring Joy Forward podcast. Conversations to explore, heal, and grow. You can find us at bringjoyforward.com, and we'd love to have you join us in our community Facebook group. Thank you for listening.